Hello, everyone. Recently, I gave everyone just a quick survey on where we are with the course and how everyone felt with the online blended hybrid, all those elements of that. The feedback was very positive. Everyone said they really enjoyed the teaching and the online option of this. There was one thing that somebody said that caught my attention. Many of y'all are wanting the discussion boards to return because they said that built a sense of community, and I agree with that completely. So we're going to I'll bring some more discussion board elements to that. So less homework and more discussion board will definitely help out everyone in the future. So that's good. Brings it, and that's a real good thing. So one person even said, "It's not broke, don't fix it. Keep doing the online." So we will definitely do that. So today I just want to talk to you about where we are now with education, and with you being in the school settings, you're going to hear terms such as ESSA or Essa, and we need to make sure we know what that is. So we're going to go through this document real quick. But before that, we need to go back to a little history lesson, and the history lesson is how do we get here to where we are? The first thing is, well, Ronald Reagan in the 1980s, and we have what is called A Nation at Risk, which is a paper that came out and discussed a nation at risk. So I'm going to show you a video on that one so you can have a better understanding of what that's about.
In education, and in 1983 their report comes out. For the most part, the schools fail miserably.
The nation was shocked.
The report states bluntly that the very future of our nation is at risk.
The idea that there was a rising tide of mediocrity was something that really captured the imagination of the American public, of the press.
It was full of apocalyptic language, and so it made for a great news story. We had a wonderful time reporting it.
They certainly had no idea that the risk was the school. They were thinking about nuclear weapons and bombs and all of that sort of thing.
So this was really an open letter to the American people. That's the report. That's how small it is. It's only 36 pages.
So President Reagan comes in and the economy is not doing well. We have mortgage rates are really high. We have long lines at the gas pumps.
The budget plan I submit to you on February 8th will realize major savings by dismantling the departments of energy and education.
Ronald Reagan appoints Terrell Bell as his first Secretary of Education.
Advocates of more and more government interference in education have had ample time to make their case, and they failed.
Which is a tough job given that President Reagan had talked about wanting to publicly abolish the Department of Education.
Open a newspaper these days. You will read that our schools are handing out diplomas to kids who are nearly illiterate.
The other political reality was that a lot of Republicans thought that American schools were in terrible shape.
Students are performing not as well on standardized tests as their parents did 20 years ago.
Terrell Bell did not share this sentiment. He thought that basically Americans' education, while it had some problems, was in fairly good shape. So he figured that if he could appoint a prestigious blue ribbon commission, they would come in and say that U.S. education is actually in fairly good shape.
I received a call from Secretary of Education Ted Bell in 1981 and asked if I would serve as chairman of the National Commission on Excellence in Education. I laid down certain conditions. The first condition was that the report would be published, whether Secretary Bell liked it or not, and whether President Reagan liked it or not. He agreed to arrange to that.
I think one of the things that he expected was that this commission was going to say, hey, America's not doing so bad. It actually paint kind of a rosy picture of what was going on in America educationally.
And so we met for the first time in the office of our President Reagan.
The president was very clear. He essentially believed that the schools were the responsibility of the states and not the federal government. His advisors were supporting him in that position.
He asked each of us to tell one question to him. What I had to say to him was, there are pictures of past presidents in this room. When people talk to your picture, they will say, he really did great things for American education. Well, he smiled at me and asked the next one to talk.
Well, these were 18 people who had very different views, but there was a common commitment to identify the problems that K-12 had.
This was 18 months of work. We'd had 40 meetings all across the country.
We pursued what are students studying? How is the performance measured? What's the condition of the teaching profession? What is the adequacy of funding from the states?
It was a terribly difficult thing to be doing.
We concluded that the condition of American education, K through 12, had deteriorated badly in the previous 25 years. Now, the person who wrote the first draft was Professor Gerald Holton from Harvard.
There came to me the idea that this is a report not just to the American people, but to the president, to change his mind. And therefore, it has to be a powerful one. And so I put in this rather famous remark that if a foreign country had imposed this miserable educational system on us, we would have perhaps declared war on them. After all, he's in charge of declaring war.
We submitted it to Bell. He didn't see it. That's the first time he ever saw the report. And he said, this report's going to change the country. I'm going to do everything I can in my power to persuade the president to get back of it.
Secretary Bell really kind of went out and was pushing. I mean, the report that was produced was not a rosy picture of what was going on in America educationally at all.
So this was a very important day. The commission acted officially to submit it. It had been published. It was out.
President of the United States.
The east rim of the White House was packed with people, and he gave a really nice speech.
Well, today you've issued your report.
And he said, I congratulate you, because in it, it has exactly what I asked you to do.
So we'll continue to work in the months ahead for passage of tuition tax credits, voluntary school prayer, and abolishing the Department of Education.
None of that was in our report. We were all dismayed. Jerry Holton was sitting in the front row, and I heard him groan.
The number of us sitting there in front of him were thunderstruck. W.O. Baker said loud enough to be heard in back where the reporters were. He said, we have been had.
It was a great story. From a news point of view, it was definitely an above-the-fold story.
But the press loved the report far beyond any of our expectations.
The commission discovered something that borders on a disaster.
It was full of apocalyptic language. It was a blatantly political document, and so it made for a great news story.
And the total printing, I'm told, by the Department of Education came to 6 million copies.
Excellence is going to cost. And I think the only way that that can be understood is to appreciate that mediocrity is going to cost far more.
People advising the president were not friendly to this report.
13% of America's 17-year-olds are functionally illiterate.
They thought we were exaggerating the situation when we were in fact not exaggerating it.
And we teach the average kid in the United States 1 to 2 years of mathematics. Japan has 6 years of math. Russia has 7.5 years of math.
We were paying a price for that, and the price that we would pay in the long run would be disastrous.
Polls began showing that the report had resonated with the American public.
And the press had proceeded to excoriate the president for several days.
And so the White House picked up on this. At that point, President Reagan decided that perhaps education is a viable political issue.
I had a call from the White House, it was about maybe 3 weeks or something, after the report was out, asking if I could travel with the president on Air Force One. We got on Air Force One. He said, I'm afraid I misspoke when I accepted it. I'd like to know the answers to the following questions. We went through every question he had in his own handwriting, by the way. At the end of it, he said, I like this report. I'm going to go sell it with you. That was it. He went all around the United States with Bell.
Welcome to our panel, and we'd like to begin by inviting you, if you would, to make a few opening remarks.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Secretary.
The irony is that Secretary Bell discovered what the inside of the Air Force One looked like.
people across the country took note. I took note as the governor of North Carolina. As soon as A Nation at Risk came out, we produced our report shortly thereafter entitled A Nation Prepared.
The last time education was the focus of such intense public debate was during the 1950s. This nation then was shaken when the Soviets launched their Sputnik. We responded by making math, science, and engineering education a priority.
The big achievement of Nation at Risk was to make educational quality something that was at the center of national discussions.
I believe the Commission's report has shaken the nation as well, and we need shaking.
The legacy of Nation at Risk is that it is the beginning of the modern education reform movement.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, for your interest in boosting education.
And thus did Ted Bell become the father of school reform.
All right, so that's what A Nation at Risk was. And you actually see where it came from. It came from the fact that Reagan was going to pull funding away from the Department of Education and actually shut down the Department of Education. So at that point, they did a report that said that we were far behind. All right, so then when we get to 2001, 2002, many of y'all know about this document, and that is No Child Left Behind, signed by George W. Bush and lasted for 12 years, 2014. So this is just a real quick video just to give you a recap of No Child Left Behind.
It's been 10 years since the No Child Left Behind Act was passed by Congress and signed by President Bush. Today, its performance is beyond dispute. The act came with a massive infusion of new federal spending and federal control, but student achievement has been flat, and states have less flexibility today than before the act was passed. A big investment without much measurable return.
So a lot of people who supported No Child Left Behind probably really were well-intentioned. They wanted the federal government to make state school districts bring all kids to a high bar of proficiency by saying if you want federal money, you've got to have state tests, you've got to have high standards, and you've got to get all these kids educated. Many others probably realized, though, and because it was hard to miss, that in No Child Left Behind, essentially what it was telling states was really set low bars, or write easy tests, or set low standards that you call proficiency because you stay out of trouble under the law, you get even more money, and everybody comes out looking good except for the kids who actually are no better educated than they were before the law.
Today, policy scholars seem to agree there's at least one bright spot in No Child Left Behind. The act, they say, at least forced states and school districts to pay more attention to the achievements of groups of students that they might otherwise ignore. That sunshine, the advocates argue, gave us a clearer picture of student achievement.
It didn't provide sunshine, it provided a bright, shiny lie. We're now telling these kids and their parents that those children are proficient. They are now up to speed educationally, but the definition of proficiency, what it means, isn't real proficiency. It is a lie that's designed to keep schools and districts out of trouble while not having to actually educate kids any better.
No Child Left Behind was meant to provide new funding and new requirements, but many argued the law was not about federal control. School districts would be expected to give high-stakes tests in math, reading, and science. They would also be required to bring all students to proficiency by 2014, but control over curriculum was supposed to remain a local concern.
This was clearly an escalation in federal control, but Republicans in particular, to sell this to their constituency, said, no, this isn't an increase in federal control because states will set their own standards, tests, etc. This, though, set the stage for where we are now, which is a move to have a federal curriculum, to have national standards, national tests, and the federal government through the Race to the Top program, through the Obama administration's waivers from No Child Left Behind, is putting that into place. They're telling states, if you want to get out of this ridiculous, onerous No Child Left Behind law, you now have to adopt national standards, a national curriculum, and soon you'll have to adopt national tests, which, oh, by the way, the federal government is paying for. Most people now accept that No Child Left Behind is a failure. The reality is, it's not No Child Left Behind that is ultimately the problem. It's the very process by which federal education policy is made.
Politicians have powerful incentives to give the most consideration to the very people they're supposed to be holding accountable: teachers, their unions, and other lobbying groups.
So the only solution to this problem is to obey the Constitution, which gives the federal government no authority to be involved in education, and get Washington out of our classrooms.
So enough of recapping of where we have been. So now let's talk about where we are. And where we are is the Every Student Succeeds Act, or Essa, as they give the abbreviation, or Essa. I don't know, whichever acronym you want to go. We'll just call it ESSA or Essa. This was signed in the law in 2015. So as you remember, President Trump was elected in 2016. But this was signed into law in December of 2015. So it's one of the last things to be signed before President Obama leaves office. So I kind of have some issues with that. And one issue was that President Obama, when he ran for president in 2008, he had made the argument that he was going to get rid of No Child Left Behind. But to do that, he would have to shut it down and shut down that funding from No Child Left Behind to the state. So instead of doing that, he allows waivers, which allow people who were not meeting AYP, adequate yearly progress, or were not at 100%, to not get punished if they agree to do things like Common Core and items such as that. So President Obama could have shut down No Child Left Behind, but he chose not to. But I can see why he chose not to, because if he did, then he would have no educational agenda, because there was no other program to pass. Finally, in 2015, one of the last things he did as president was to sign Essa. And it was really pushed by the Republicans and the Democrats, mainly, because everyone was sick of No Child Left Behind. They saw that as a failure because no one was at a 100% pass rate. So let's look at what Essa is, because it's now our law of the land. The key word I have for Essa is flexibility. That's what we're going to see. A recurring theme throughout this document is flexibility. So it was signed in 2015, and it's now what we do. So let's look at some of these things. Nationally recognized assessment into high school. So Essa does not define a nationally recognized assessment. Like No Child Left Behind defined a nationally recognized assessment, but each state had to create their own assessment, and then it had to be approved by the federal government. Under Essa, every state has to use a nationally recognized assessment in high school, but it doesn't have to be approved by the federal government, really, and it really doesn't have to be created by the states. So it kind of has to be approved, but not really approved, and you'll see what I mean. And the one thing they keep suggesting is the SAT or the ACT. That's where Essa really starts pointing towards, is we need to look at going back to the ACT as our state test to measure if everyone has learned everything in school. You see this also in Mississippi when we're talking about state test. Everyone keeps talking about we need to go back to the ACT. Well, we have a $120 million contract with a company outside of Mississippi to provide a nationally recognized assessment. But when that contract is up in a couple of years, do not be surprised if we go towards the ACT. So that's where I see education going when we're looking at state test, is we're about to move towards the ACT. It talks about approval requirements for this. Yes, it has to be approved by the National Review Board. However, it also makes the point right here. Once the SEA approves an assessment, that test may be used by any other LEA or state agency that request to use it. Well, the ACT's already been approved as a national assessment. So they're pushing us towards moving towards the ACT. So if you know this, then you listen to the radio and you listen to talk shows, especially Mississippi talk shows that talk about, like there's a Paul Gallo show that talks, he had the educational secretary for Mississippi, one of the legislators on there, and he was talking about we need to get to the ACT, and I was like, man, that sounds just like Essa, because Essa was stressing that. So that's what everybody's starting to say. We need to go to the ACT, and we need to go to the ACT because it's approved by the federal government. It's already been approved, and it'll cost us less money instead of signing a $120 million contract for state test. Another thing it talks about is No Child Left Behind did not talk about computer adaptive assessments. So I want y'all to remember what this is. Computer adaptive assessments are not tests taken on a computer. It is a test taken on a computer that changes as you answer the questions. So if I ask you about Christopher Columbus coming to America and you answer one of the multiple choice questions incorrectly, it then takes you to a multiple choice question that will help you with the previous one. So the assessment is adapting based on your answers. So it's not either I get it right or I get it wrong, it's what do you need to learn and what have you learned. So it's computer adaptive assessments. And Essa says we need to start moving towards that. We need to adopt a computer system which changes difficulty based on the student. States may be exempt from some state tests. You see that as well. Essa requires that states annually test at least 95% of all public school students. But some students can opt out. But here's the weakness of Essa, which was just like No Child Left Behind. No Child Left Behind required everyone to test 100%. Essa drops it down to 95%. But Essa also says that if it drops below 95%, whoever opts out will receive a 0 as a non-participant for that school's scoring. So they're still trying to figure out how they can fix that. Should we make everyone test? And items such as that. And also, every school must create programs that will address low participation rates. So that's one of the things they hold over from No Child Left Behind. No Child Left Behind required 100%. Everyone had to take the test. Well, under Essa, they're dropping it to 95%, but they're still saying, well, what happens if too many people opt out? This innovative assessment pilot is the states are being encouraged to implement an assessment system that is different, and they can have a pilot on this. Now, that's interesting. So at this point, I want to switch gears and explain this and then talk to you about a real-world scenario that's occurring at this point. So let's talk real quick about this innovative assessment pilot. Essa says that school districts inside a state, or an LEA they call it, can participate in an alternative pilot for an assessment. They can create an assessment or use a different assessment which will let them rate their students. So the entire state cannot do it, but some school districts can do it. So with that, let's talk about Corinth, Mississippi. A couple of weeks ago, you probably saw a link or a news article that said State Board votes to assign grades to Corinth and special schools. And it says that the Mississippi State Board of Education today voted to assign unofficial letter grades for the 2017-18 school year to 4 schools that serve students with disabilities and the Corinth School District. Corinth is located in northeast Mississippi, above Tupelo, near the Tennessee border, about 30 miles from Shiloh, Tennessee. The school district had not received grades in the previous years. The reason was Corinth, right, look what it says, the Essa requires that all students be included in measures of performance. the law requires those measures to be applied consistently so that schools need improvement will be identified or support. Accountability grades are part. State and federal laws require all schools to have districts. All right, simple as that. Look what Corinth got. Corinth got an ELF grade with EL component, English learner component, an unofficial grade. Then we get this article. The Northeast Mississippi School District has filed legal notice that it will pursue legal action over the grades its schools received from the state, even as lawmakers from the area press for a legislative fix. The Corinth School District filed a notice of appeal January 25th in Hinds County Circuit Court, saying that Corinth will challenge the ELF and that the school should get a C rating. All right, so they're appealing their rating. The district maintains that the state has unfairly reneged on a deal to develop an alternative grading system incorporating Corinth's use of a different kind of exam than the normal state test. So Corinth had gotten into an agreement with MDE to use an alternative assessment, just like Essa wanted them to do. Corinth focused on that assessment. Right here it says the state designated Corinth as one of the number of districts of innovation, and using that status, Corinth began structuring its curriculum around the Cambridge exams, international assessments administered by a unit of Cambridge University in England. They also adopted a modified year-round schedule. As part of the changes, Corinth and the Mississippi Department of Education agreed at the time to develop an alternative assessment. But last year, state officials concluded that both state and federal law required Corinth to be graded based on the same state test that all other students taking grades. So there's your catch. MDE and Corinth agreed that they would use an alternative assessment, just like Essa argued. But Mississippi law says that every school, this is a Mississippi law that was tied over from No Child Left Behind, said that every school would be rated A to F based on the state assessment system. See, there's your contradiction. The school district and the State Department got into agreement to follow Essa, but the state of Mississippi had already, from No Child Left Behind, had a law that said Corinth needed to be rated based on that system. So MDE was stuck in the middle. Now, what should have MDE have done? MDE should have already had the law changed allowing them to do this, to have an alternative assessment, but they didn't. Look at that here. It says, Corinth students have been taking those tests, but the district has instead been emphasizing the Cambridge exams. When the students at Corinth High School took the test early last summer without any review, they bombed them. Even though the high school has a 95% graduation rate and an ACT score far above the state average. So this also shows to me that students who are taking the state test mandated by No Child Left Behind that's still there are mainly being taught the test. Corinth students have been doing the ACT and the Cambridge alternative assessment and have been doing well with that. But then they were told they had to take the state test because that was state law, and they bombed it. Now look at this right here. In the meantime, Democratic State Representative Nick Bain of Corinth has introduced House Bill 688, which will require the state to develop the alternative grading system. That bill would direct the state to assign Corinth a placeholder grade of District of Innovation, just like Essa talks about, while it was developing the system. This is the bill right here that is still in committee, that's been passed, which says right here that, so what does all this mean? The state of Mississippi had not changed their laws to allow Essa to be implemented so that there could be an alternative assessment system done as a pilot test at a school district. MDE forgot to get the law changed, but they allowed Corinth to go ahead and become a pilot program with an alternative assessment under Essa. And then Corinth was full steam ahead, having a good time. ACT scores were going up. But then the State Department comes in and says, y'all got to take the state test because it turns out legally you're supposed to. Corinth says, well, that's not fair. They take it anyway and they get an F rating. So Corinth is doing good things up there. They're doing innovative items, but the state's rating them as an F because they have to based on the old test. So the end result is now the state legislators are fast-tracking this bill through, trying to get it passed so Corinth can have a B or A rating because they're going to be looked at as a innovative pilot testing on their assessment. Insanity, and another issue of Essa not being properly implemented. Essa also talks about English learners and accountability. There needs to be a plan for assessment for ELs, as they call it, English learners. As you scroll through here, there also has to be support for low-performing schools. There has to be greater significant flexibility is one of the key words. But also, right here's a big thing. Instead of just giving money to a school district and tying money into that, they're allowing under Essa for state departments to take title money, federal money for low-performing school districts, and they're not constrained so much to it. They can spend it on other elements such as that. So they're not constrained to buying school buses. They're not constrained to doing one thing. This is something also different. The definition of highly qualified teachers, No Child Left Behind, said every teacher had to be highly qualified, which means they had to be certified in their subject area. That is now gone. Highly qualified is now gone. We do not use that. Under Essa, states and districts must ensure that low-income and minority students are not served at disproportionate rates by inexperienced, ineffective, or out-of-field teachers, which means that we have to give incentives for people to teach in critical needs areas. And we do that as well. As you scroll down here, teacher and school leader evaluations. Under the No Child Left Behind waiver, states are required to develop and implement teacher and school leader evaluation system. Essa removes this requirement. So now we can implement our own evaluation system and how we see fit. More flexibility. Also talks here about Title I supplement, and you can look at that as you wish. But here's one of the key things. This 21st Century School Title IV. They're going to get rid of this drug-free school program, which was founded in 2007, which they said did not really work. And we're going to move towards safe and healthy students, effective use of technology, and well-rounded educational opportunities. So what they're really doing is taking the money from the drug-free school program and changing it to what they're called 21st Century schools. They're wanting family engagement centers. They're going to give money. Consolidated programs. And another thing right here that is different is this. The federal government is going to give less money for these programs. And it says right here in this chart if you want to break it down. So, long story short, the federal government is going to give less money. See, they had magnetic school assistance. They were given millions of dollars. Promised neighborhoods, they were given millions. They were given money like that. So that's gone now. And you'll see that is the federal government is going to give less money for after-school programs, for programs to help students and communities to help technology, to help arts, because they're wanting the states to do it. So it's giving us flexibility. State plans, states need to devise their own plans, key changes, and items such as that. One thing I wanted to show you as well is this article right here. The MDE invites applicants for the new Mississippi Teacher Residency Program. This is also a need to combat the teacher shortage, but I want to show you something, and that's right here. The Mississippi Department of Education invites aspiring teachers to apply for a new Mississippi Teacher Residency Program. So you can enter the residency program. It's for people who are not a certified teacher. It's a $4.1 million grant from the Kellogg Foundation. But look at this. You must agree to a 2-year undergraduate elementary education special education program. So it's elementary education and special education. You're working alongside experienced teachers. You'll receive a full ride 2-year with residency. But you also must work in one of these school districts, Jackson, Sunflower County, Gulfport, Ocean Springs, and you'll receive a degree, but also you must commit to 3 years teaching there. All right, so, and one thing it talks about right here, look at this. The W.K. Kellogg grant will also fund a performance-based licensure pilot program, which will help a select group of Mississippi teachers with provisional license become fully licensed. People who are like emergency certified, they can't pass praxis. And look at that here. The program is aimed at teachers who have proven to be effective, but are struggling to pass the licensure exam. That one sentence right there tells me something, and it should tell you something too. We are hinting at, in many, many years down the road, getting rid of praxis. Because right there, look at that. They are going to create a program that if someone can't pass praxis, they can be either a teacher's aide, they can do something else, but they can do another exam to get their licensure. So, what does this mean? Essa is giving us a flexible option. A flexible option. That's what's going on. And we're also taking that flexible option on ACT instead of state test, and we're changing it to also looking at some of our other things. We're trying to take back our right as schools, as states, or as they call them, LEAs. So now you know what Essa is. I was going to show you another video, but I don't like it. So I'm just going to show you. I'm just going to end it right here with this. Now you know what Essa is. It gives you flexibility. I'm going to put this article up so you can read it if you want to. Please do if you can. And that's all. Thank you for now. You know what No Child Left Behind was. You know what Nation at Risk was. And you now know what Essa is. Thank you for listening.